The distress signal was faint and barely coherent, a broken transmission carried across the vast void of the galaxy. It was a desperate plea, full of static and fear, cutting in and out as if the sender had little time to send it. The message came from the Harkoni Confederacy, a collection of peaceful, trade-oriented planets nestled in one of the quieter arms of the galaxy. Known for their sophisticated diplomacy, cultural achievements, and their reluctance to involve themselves in military endeavors, the Harkoni were admired by many. But their pacifism came at a cost. They had no warships, no standing army, and no defenses that could repel a true invader. The message repeated on every frequency. To any who hear this, we plead for aid. We are under attack. They came from the void, unstoppable and merciless. Our fleets are destroyed. Our people are dying. We cannot hold for much longer. Please save us. The Galactic Concord, an alliance of advanced species that govern much of the known galaxy, heard the message immediately. The Concord prided itself on its policies of cooperation and mutual protection. But bureaucracy moved slowly in the best of times. This was not one of those times. Meetings were called. Ambassadors argued. Subcommittees were formed to assess the risk of intervention. The Concord's laws prohibited direct military action in non-member territories without unanimous approval. And the Harkoni, despite their close ties to the Concord, had never formally joined. As hours stretched into days, the debate grew increasingly convoluted. What if this was a trap? What if intervening provoked a greater war? Could resources be spared for a non-member? In the halls of power, the fate of an entire civilization hung in limbo. But far from the pristine council chambers of the Concord, in the unregulated outer systems, another force was stirring: humanity. Humanity's worlds were listed in Concord archives as hazard class, a designation given to planets deemed too dangerous for most species to inhabit. Earth, humanity's cradle, was a world of extremes: tectonic upheaval, violent weather, predators that stalked both land and sea, and a history of devastating wars. Yet somehow, the humans had not only survived but thrived. To the rest of the galaxy, they were a paradox, a species equally capable of stunning acts of creation and destruction. Their resilience was legendary, their stubbornness infamous. And while they were not officially part of the Galactic Concord, they maintained a precarious alliance with the larger body, often as a necessary evil. When the Harkoni's plea for help reached humanity, it wasn't deliberated in a committee. There were no votes, no debates, no hesitations. The response came almost immediately, with the blunt clarity that defined humanity's approach to most things. The United Nations Stellar Command issued the order: respond to the Harkoni distress call, deploy the fleet, neutralize the threat. Admiral Lynn Adebayo stood on the bridge of the UNS Resolute, the flagship of humanity's first expeditionary fleet. The bridge was a hive of activity, crew members moving with practiced efficiency as they prepared for departure. Fleet status? She asked, her voice calm but commanding. 70 vessels mobilized and ready, replied Commander Ethan Park, her second-in-command. We've got destroyers, carriers, and 2 dreadnoughts. All ships are fully armed and provisioned. Estimated time to Harkoni space: 36 hours at maximum warp. Adebayo nodded, her expression unreadable. She was a veteran of a dozen campaigns, but this mission was different. The enemy was an unknown force, the Drezhak, described in fragmented refugee reports as a hive-like species of insectoid monsters. They didn't just conquer worlds, they consumed them. The Harkoni's descriptions of living, organic ships and bioengineered weapons were enough to make seasoned officers uneasy. What do we know about the Drezhak? She asked. Park frowned as he reviewed the intelligence reports. Not much. The last confirmed Drezhak sightings were over a century ago. They were believed extinct after their hives collapsed during an internal conflict. If the reports are accurate, they're back, and stronger than ever. Adebayo considered this in silence. Humanity's fleets had faced plenty of threats in their time: pirates, rogue AI, alien incursions, but the Drezhak sounded like something out of a nightmare. "What's our casualty projection?" Park hesitated. "It's not good. They outnumber us, and we have no first-hand experience with their capabilities. But, Admiral, we're humanity's best. If anyone can do this, it's us." Adebayo gave a small nod. She didn't need platitudes. She needed results. Turning to her comms officer, she gave the order, "Open a channel to the fleet." The comms officer nodded, and within moments, her voice echoed across every ship in the Armada. "This is Admiral Adebayo. You all know why we're here. The Harkoni Confederacy has called for help, and no one else is answering. They are facing an enemy that intends to wipe them out, and without us, they don't stand a chance. We are humanity's first and last line of defense for these people. The Drezhak think they can prey on the weak. Let's show them what happens when they meet the strong. Prepare for battle." Adebayo out. 36 hours later, the Deathworlder fleet dropped out of warp near Ilari Prime, the Harkoni homeworld. The sight that greeted them was worse than any of the reports had suggested. The planet hung in space like a battered jewel, its shimmering oceans and vibrant cities marred by scars of battle. Massive Drezhak ships, grotesque constructs of chitin and biomass, surrounded the planet in a loose blockade. Smaller vessels swarmed between them, their movements chaotic but coordinated. Human sensors quickly picked up the remnants of the Harkoni defense fleet, a mere handful of ships battered and barely holding the line. Below, on the surface, fires burned in every major city. The Drezhak didn't just invade, they overwhelmed. "Admiral, we're picking up distress beacons from the Harkoni ships," Park reported. "They're heavily outnumbered, and their planetary defenses are almost completely offline." Adebayo didn't hesitate. "All ships, move to engage. Target the largest Drezhak vessels first, and clear a path to the planet. Prioritize saving as many Harkoni ships as possible. And for God's sake, hit them hard." Humanity's fleet surged forward, a wall of steel and firepower against the grotesque Drezhak horde. The opening salvo was devastating. Humanity's railguns fired hypervelocity projectiles, tearing through the organic hulls of Drezhak ships like paper. Plasma cannons lit up the void, their brilliant blue-white bolts incinerating swarms of enemy fighters. Missile barges filled the gaps, each impact sending shockwaves through the alien blockade. The Drezhak, caught off guard by the sudden and overwhelming assault, faltered. Several of their larger ships were destroyed in the opening minutes, their twisted forms breaking apart under the relentless bombardment. On board the Resolute, Adebayo watched the battle unfold with cold precision. "Focus fire on their carriers," she ordered. "If we can cut off their fighter support, we'll give the Harkoni a chance to regroup." "Understood," Park replied, relaying the orders to the fleet. The human ships moved with terrifying efficiency, their formation tightening as they pressed the attack. The Harkoni, emboldened by the unexpected reinforcements, joined in where they could, targeting the smaller Drezhak vessels with what little firepower they had left. But the Drezhak were far from defeated. As humanity's fleet tore through their initial lines, the hive adapted. Swarms of fighters redirected their efforts, converging on the human ships with suicidal determination. The Resolute shuddered as a wave of bioplasma projectiles slammed into its shields. "Shields at 78%, Park reported. "We're detecting boarding pods on approach." Adebayo's jaw tightened. "Deploy countermeasures and alert the Marines. If they think they can board us, they're in for a rude awakening." Across the fleet, humanity's soldiers prepared to repel the Drezhak boarders. These Marines weren't just trained. They were Deathworlders, born and bred on a planet that had demanded strength and resilience. They were ready to show the Drezhak exactly what humanity was capable of. And the Drezhak were about to learn why the galaxy called humanity Deathworlders. The Drezhak didn't attack like any other foe humanity had faced. Their boarding pods slammed into the hulls of human ships like parasitic leeches, burrowing through steel and composite plating with biological drills. Inside each pod, dozens of insectoid warriors waited, their mandibles clicking in anticipation of fresh prey. On the Resolute, alarms blared as Marines rushed to the breach points. Sergeant Elena Ramirez and her squad were among the first to respond, standing ready in a narrow corridor leading to one of the lower decks. Status. Ramirez barked into her comm as she checked her rifle. Pod penetration confirmed, came the voice of her squad mate, Private Callahan. Deck 12, Section C. They're trying to force the blast doors. Then let's stop them, Ramirez said grimly. She turned to her team. Flommers up front. Everyone else, conserve ammo. These bastards don't go down easy. As the squad took position, the screeching of metal echoed through the ship. The Drezhak boarding pod had finished drilling, and its hatch erupted outward with a wet thunk. Then they came. The first Drezhak warrior through the breach was a hulking, six-limbed monstrosity, covered in glossy black carapace. Its compound eyes reflected the red emergency lights, and its mandibles opened wide in a shrill, chittering screech. Fire! Ramirez shouted. Flamethrowers roared to life, engulfing the corridor in a wave of searing heat. The lead Drezhak shrieked as its carapace blistered and cracked, but more of them pushed forward, undeterred by their comrades' agony. Bullets followed the flames, tearing through exoskeletons with brutal efficiency. But for every Drezhak that fell, two more took its place. They swarmed over their fallen, their clawed limbs clattering against the walls and floor. One leapt toward Ramirez, its mandibles snapping inches from her face. She ducked and fired point-blank into its thorax, the impact splattering viscous green ichor across her visor. "Hold the line!" she shouted, even as the Drezhak closed in. The rest of the fleet faced similar chaos. On the Ironclad, a destroyer leading the charge against the Drezhak's main formation, Captain Anders commanded his crew with practice comm. "Target the carriers," he ordered, gesturing to the largest organic vessels in the Drezhak fleet. "We need to stop their fighter swarms." The Ironclad's railguns thundered, each shot punching through Drezhak hulls with brutal precision. Nearby, a smaller human frigate, the Valiant, was locked in a deadly duel with a Drezhak assault ship, its automated turrets blazing as swarms of fighters clawed at its shields. "Captain," one of Anders' officers called, "boarding pods inbound." Anders gritted his teeth. "Alert the Marines. No Drezhak sets foot on my ship." On Ilari Prime, the Harkani people clung to hope as the battle raged above them. From the fortified command center deep beneath the planet's capital city, Governor Lyria watched the chaos unfold on a dozen monitors. The human fleet was fighting valiantly, but the odds were daunting. "Do you think they'll win?" one of her advisors asked nervously. Lyria didn't answer immediately. The humans had arrived like a storm, their ships cutting through the Drezhak lines with a ferocity the Harkani had never witnessed. But the Drezhak were relentless, and the Harkani knew better than most how overwhelming their numbers could be. "If anyone can, it's them," Lyria said finally. "But we must be prepared for the worst." Back on the Resolute, Admiral Lynn Adebayo monitored the battle with steely focus. The fleet was holding, but the Drezhak's sheer numbers were beginning to tell. "Damage report," she ordered. "Shields at 65%, Park replied. "We've lost contact with the Harbinger and the Celestial Dawn." Boarding parties reported on multiple ships. Adebayo's lips thinned. The Drezhak were exploiting humanity's Achilles heel. The need to fight on two fronts. While the fleet held the line in space, the Drezhak were wreaking havoc aboard human vessels. "We need to take the pressure off," she muttered. "Focus fire on their flagship. If we can take it out, we might disrupt their coordination." Park nodded and relayed the order. The Drezhak flagship was a nightmare of organic engineering. Nearly 3 kilometers long, its pulsating surface glowed with sickly bioluminescence. Tentacle-like appendages lashed out, spewing bioplasma at anything within range. The Resolute and the Dreadnought Titan turned their guns on the behemoth, unleashing a storm of firepower. Railgun slugs smashed into its carapace, and plasma bolts seared deep into its flesh. The Drezhak flagship writhed under the assault, its hull rupturing in multiple places. But it wasn't going down without a fight. The flagship retaliated, launching a barrage of bioplasma projectiles that slammed into the Titan's shields. The massive ship shuddered as its defenses buckled, and secondary explosions rippled along its hull. "Admiral, the Titan's shields are down!" Park shouted. "Tell them to fall back," Adebayo ordered. "We'll finish it." The Resolute pressed the attack, its railguns hammering the flagship's exposed core. With a final, deafening roar, the Drezhak vessel collapsed inward, a massive explosion consuming it from within. The destruction of the flagship was a turning point. The Drezhak fleet began to falter, their coordination breaking down, as their hive mind struggled to adapt. On the Resolute, Ramirez and her squad finally gained the upper hand against the Drezhak borders. The corridor was littered with alien corpses, and the surviving Marines were bloodied but victorious. "We've secured Deck 12, Ramirez reported. "What's next?" "Hold your position," came the reply. "We're pushing them back in space. Just keep the ship intact." "Roger that," Ramirez said, wiping ichor from her visor. "Let's see if they're dumb enough to send more." In orbit, the human fleet rallied. The destruction of the Drezhak flagship had emboldened the surviving Harkani ships, and together they launched a counteroffensive. One by one, the Drezhak ships were destroyed, their organic hulls unable to withstand humanity's relentless firepower. The tide of the battle shifted, and what had begun as a desperate defense turned into a rout. "Admiral," Park said, his voice tinged with cautious optimism, "we're forcing them back." Adebayo allowed herself a rare smile. "Good. Let's finish this." After hours of brutal fighting, the battle was over. The Drezhak fleet had been annihilated, their survivors fleeing into the void. The human ships, though battered and scarred, remained in control of the battlefield. Admiral Adebayo stood on the bridge, surveying the aftermath. Around her, the bridge crew cheered quietly, their exhaustion evident but their spirits high. "Casualty report?" she asked. 17 ships lost," Park replied. "Hundreds dead, but thousands saved." Adebayo nodded. It was a steep price, but one she knew humanity was willing to pay. "Send a message to the Harkani," she said. "Let them know they're safe. And to the Concord. Remind them who answered the call when they wouldn't." On the surface of Ilari Prime, Governor Lyria addressed her people, her voice trembling with emotion. "We owe our lives to the Deathworlders," she said. "They came when no one else would. Today, we stand free because of their courage." And in the darkness of space, the galaxy took notice. The skies above Ilari Prime were quiet now, though the scars of battle lingered. Wreckage from Drezhak and human ships alike drifted in orbit, casting long shadows on the planet below. Emergency beacons blinked among the debris, marking the sites where survivors might yet be found. Admiral Lynn Adebayo stood on the Resolute's observation deck, staring out at the wreckage. Her fleet had achieved victory, but the cost was undeniable. She could feel the weight of every decision she'd made. The lost ships, the fallen soldiers, the faces she'd never know but would never forget. "Admiral," Commander Ethan Park interrupted gently, stepping up beside her. "The Harkani governor is requesting a meeting. She insists it's urgent." Adebayo exhaled slowly, setting aside her personal reflections. "Patch her through to the briefing room. I'll be there in 5 minutes." As she turned to leave, she glanced back at the shattered remnants of the Drezhak fleet. They'd won the battle, but the war, the true scope of what the Drezhak represented, was far from over. Governor Lyria's holographic image flickered to life in the briefing room. She was visibly shaken, her ornate robes of office wrinkled and stained with soot. The toll of the invasion was etched deeply into her face, but her voice carried an unyielding strength. "Admiral Adebayo," she began, inclining her head. On behalf of the Harkoni Confederacy, I extend our eternal gratitude. Without your intervention, we would have been annihilated. Atabeo nodded, her expression neutral but respectful. You don't need to thank me, Governor. Your people sent a distress call, and humanity answered. That's all there is to it. Lyria's lips tightened into a thin line. That is precisely why I requested this conversation. Admiral, your fleet saved us, but the Drezhak are not finished. This was not their entire force. Atabeo's gaze sharpened. Explain. Lyria gestured to someone off-screen, and a Harkoni scientist stepped into view. The figure, a wiry male with pale blue skin and wide, anxious eyes, nodded in greeting before projecting a holographic map of the galaxy. The Drezhak attack came in waves, the scientist explained. We believe the force you defeated here was merely an advanced fleet. Our long-range probes have detected more Drezhak signatures moving toward us from deep space. They are countless. The room went silent as the implications sank in. How long do we have? Atabeo asked, her tone icy. 3 standard months at most, the scientist replied grimly. And they will not stop at Ilari Prime. The Drezhak consume everything in their path. If they are not stopped here, they will spread like a plague across the galaxy. The briefing was over, but Atabeo remained seated, staring at the galaxy map. Humanity had faced extinction-level threats before, but this was different. The Drezhak weren't just predators. They were an apocalyptic force. Thoughts? She asked, addressing Park and the other officers gathered around the table. Park spoke first. We need to prepare, Admiral. Call for reinforcements from Sol Command, fortify the Harkoni system, and develop countermeasures against the Drezhak. If what the governor said is true, this isn't just their fight anymore. It's everyone's. Commander Yvonne Harker, head of Fleet Intelligence, nodded in agreement. The Drezhak's hive structure is both their strength and their weakness. If we can locate and destroy their central leadership, whatever acts as their queen or command node, it might disrupt their entire swarm. Atabeo tapped a finger against the table, deep in thought. And if we can't? Harker's expression darkened. Then we bleed them until there's nothing left to fight with. Messages were sent, and humanity's allies, however few and reluctant, were called to action. The galactic concord could no longer sit idle. News of the Drezhak threat spread like wildfire, and while many species hesitated, fearful of being drawn into a conflict of such scale, others began to mobilize. The Harkoni Confederacy became a fortress. Human engineers worked alongside Harkoni scientists, retrofitting planetary defenses and constructing orbital platforms. The Harkoni, though pacifists by nature, volunteered by the thousands to assist in the war effort. On Ilari Prime, Governor Lyria walked to one of the newly established military camps, marveling at the humans' efficiency. Rows of vehicles hummed as engineers calibrated weapons, and soldiers sparred in training fields, their movements precise and relentless. Lyria approached Ramirez's squad, who were taking a brief respite after their latest deployment. Sergeant Ramirez, isn't it? Ramirez stood and saluted, her face still marked by faint green streaks of Drezhak ichor. Yes, ma'am. How can I help you? I wanted to thank you, Lyria said, her voice tinged with genuine emotion. What you and your people did aboard the Resolute, it saved countless lives. Ramirez shrugged. Just doing our job, ma'am. But if you really want to thank us, get your people ready. We'll need everyone we can get when the Drezhak come back. Lyria nodded solemnly. We will be ready. Meanwhile, deep in the void, the Drezhak swarms gathered. Across countless light years, organic ships moved in unison, their hive mind united in a single purpose: consumption. In the heart of the swarm, the queen stirred, massive and grotesque. Her body pulsed with a sinister light as she communicated with her children. The loss at Ilari Prime had not gone unnoticed. The humans, Deathworlders, were an anomaly, a threat that could not be ignored. The queen chittered a series of commands, her hive mind expanding its reach. New strategies were devised, and her swarm grew ever larger. The next wave would not simply overwhelm. It would annihilate. On the Resolute, Admiral Adebayo stood before her crew. The fleet had grown in the weeks since their initial victory, bolstered by reinforcements from Earth and the reluctant contributions of the Concord. Yet, as she looked into the faces of her officers and soldiers, she saw the same fierce determination that had carried them through the first battle. Today, she began, her voice firm. We prepare for a war unlike any we've faced before. The Drezhak are coming, and they will throw everything they have at us. But they don't know who they're dealing with. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. We are Deathworlders. We are forged in fire and tempered by adversity. And when the Drezhak come, we won't just stop them. We'll make them wish they'd stayed in whatever hell they crawled out of. The room erupted in cheers, and for the first time since the battle began, Adebayo felt a flicker of hope. The Drezhak were coming, but humanity would be ready.